let's look at lesson 2. And the scripture verses for this lesson are chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation. These are the letters to the 7 churches. Actually, already back in chapter 1, verse 4, John introduced the idea of this whole book being a letter when he says, John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace and peace to you from the one who is and who was and who is to come. This is so much like the beginning of one of Paul's letters, the Apostle Paul, that some scholars think that John of Patmos might have known Paul's letters, but at the very least, he's using the pattern of introducing the whole book as a letter to 7 churches. And that, I think, is really important to remember, that the book of Revelation is not, first of all, written for us. It was written for communities 2,000 years ago for these 7 churches in Western Turkey, what's now Western Turkey. It was the province of Asia Minor. Now, certainly, it's a book that speaks to us, and it's important for us. It's also written for us. But first and foremost, it was written for these 7 churches living in these cities of Roman Asia Minor. Now, unlike Paul's letters, we don't think the letters were sent individually to each church. We think it was always a group of letters, 7 letters, and that every church could sort of overhear each other's letters. So picture it maybe like a parent bringing their 7 kids into the room, and then each kid is going to get a talking to. And there's a mix of praise and blame for each one of the churches or each one of the children, but they all hear one another's scold or praise, and every one of the churches is supposed to learn from the others, but they are different, and we know from these letters that the context of the different churches were different. Some were obviously richer than others, and some were poor, and so they get various mixes of encouragement and scolds. The biggest scold is saved for the Church of Laodicea, which is this lukewarm church that seems to take pride in the fact that it was so wealthy, and John really challenges them, or Jesus through John really challenges them. The letters all follow a pretty standard pattern that is almost formulaic, and you'll want to look at that, probably graph it out. They all begin with a description of Jesus, and then picking up on the descriptions of Jesus in chapter 1, and then there's a sort of diagnosis of that church's situation. I know this about you, and then they get a kind of mix of scold and praise, and that's part of, I think, how there's going to be throughout the book of Revelation a sort of mix of a carrot and stick kind of approach. We don't like the stick so well, but John is using it as a kind of wake-up call to communicate the urgency of God's message for these churches that seem to be too lukewarm for John's way of thinking. So each letter follows this, giving a mix of praise and blame, except for 2 churches that only get praise, which is wonderful. The scariest letter is the middle one, to Thyatira, and you'll really want to grapple with this letter. It's, I think, deliberate that it's the middle letter, and this is the only letter where John says that it's for all the churches. And here is where he unleashes this really terrible diatribe against this false prophet in that community. I mean, he's really worried about others who are prophets and what they're saying, and they seem to be doing like what the prophet Jeremiah critiqued in his time back in the Old Testament. They're saying peace, peace, when there is no peace. They are apparently preaching a message of more accommodation to Roman culture than John was comfortable with. So he's calling their message idolatry, even fornication, and threatens these other prophets with some pretty scary kinds of condemnations. And his goal is to get the churches to not follow this accommodationist ethic, but rather to be more radically opposed to the culture and not get in bed with the culture, not eat the meat that has been sacrificed in the temples, not participate in Roman rituals and worship ceremonies, even if it has consequences for people. He wants them to come out of the culture. And then the next element in each letter is this wonderful formula: to the victorious one, or to the conqueror, I will give such and such, X. And each letter then has one of these wonderful promises that's addressed to us as victors or conquerors. So we need to talk a little bit about that word, because I think that's a key one in Revelation. It's from the Greek verb nikon. It's the noun Nike. We talked in the last session about the goddess Nike, who's the goddess of Roman military victory. And this verb also meant to conquer in a militaristic sense. But what John is doing, I think, in reclaiming this word, in using it so much to talk to these churches, is to teach us a different vision of conquering that isn't about military conquering. I mean, it would have been surprising, I think, to his communities to hear themselves called conquerors or victors, because they felt powerless. They weren't victors like military soldiers are. But what John wants them to do is to see how through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ and through following Jesus, they do become victors. And this then is one of the sort of carrots, if you will, that will carry us through the middle chapters of Revelation and into the end. If we are faithful, then it's in the vision of chapter 21 that we become conquerors. The whole thing unfolds. But what these letters do is set up promises that will come to fulfillment in the final chapter of Revelation. So that final promise to the one who is victorious, or to the conquering one, I will give such and such, is a very important element of these letters. But as you enter into these letters, try to take yourself back to the first century. Go on a sort of archaeological tour, and maybe you want to rent some videos that are from the ancient world, Spartacus or Gladiator or Anthony and Cleopatra, whatever. But get yourself back into the context of the first century to see how the Roman imperial world worked, and then how daring and courageous it would have been for John or any of the Christians in the New Testament to try to resist this, to try to come out of empire and not participate in this cultural message that was all around them.